Hey everyone, welcome to Dirk Island. My name's Michael Durkheimer.
I'm Alex Durkheimer, and this is the weekend show where we talk about weird and fascinating things going on in the world.
Usually through watching documentaries.
This week, we watched the brand new HBO documentary, The Inventor, about Elizabeth Holmes, directed by Alex Gibney. We're a big fan of him. He did Going Clear, the Scientology documentary. He also did Smartest Guys in the Room on Enron, one of our favorite filmmakers.
And we're going to be discussing on this episode, do millennials love fraud? Okay, so the Theranos documentary. This movie obviously is in my favorite genre of documentary, which is a story about people lying. And that is always my favorite because it is one of the most fascinating things about being a human on planet Earth. Theranos, for those who aren't familiar, is the story of what became a $9 billion startup that promised to change the world of blood testing. So if you've ever had a blood test before, and you know that you have to stick a fairly large needle into your arm, and they take out many vials. It takes a while. Hopefully you have someone very well trained to put that needle in, and they take out many vials at a time. And if you're watching, it takes a lot of blood. Theranos is the brainchild of a 19-year-old Stanford freshman that decided that this was not the way it had to be, and that they could put just a finger prick with a few drops of blood into a little container called a nano container, and they could change the world. They wanted to run all the tests that you could run with all those vials in a teeny little device. And she filed a patent for that when she was 19. This is Elizabeth Holmes. And she created this company, and she got very, very powerful men to believe in her. And I think that is one of the this is the start of where this story gets so interesting, I think, for me at least, is the why was she so successful with something that did not work? And so the company is dissolved today, and it was a huge explosion in popular culture as far as this story unraveling. This $9 billion, probably the wealthiest woman on earth if she had that money in cash, because she almost owned half of that company. And the greatest success story, the next Steve Jobs, the next even bigger than any of these people. A potential to change the world in the way that Thomas Edison, the person who she named her device after, changed the world by inventing the light bulb.
Yeah, I thought her story is really fascinating, and it's interesting. I hate to start off this way, but Alex Gibney, I love his documentaries. I had watched 2020 special. I had watched a lot, and I felt like the story is a lot more fascinating than the documentary added to. I felt like there weren't very many big bombshells or Easter eggs for someone who had read about this story or watched it. Generally, the most interesting thing about it, they didn't cover very deeply, which is Elizabeth Holmes, and we talk about this in our favorites, which is good character. And Elizabeth Holmes is certainly at the center of this, and I wanted more of a deep dive into her relationship with this board of directors, because clearly that was a factor in how she wooed these high-level men, but also her deep voice, which just irritates the hell out of me for some reason. I mean, I cannot handle this deep, founder, clearly fake voice that people, there's anecdotes that when she would go and get drunk at cocktail parties, sometimes her voice would drop and it would revert back to her, higher tenor that's natural to her. And at the end of the documentary, I didn't really feel like I know who she is. I had heard from people who've read the book that she borders on sociopath. I didn't get enough of a sense of that. I wanted to see that in the flesh, the kind of Fire Festival equivalent of after the failure is going and hearing him go, oh yeah, well, V1 failed, but, I'm still going, that sense that despite all the failure and the lies, she believes she's gonna go on and make more companies. And these are all facts that I heard that weren't really covered in the documentary, but it has that same element of her success, and success of her fraud seems to reflect poorly on the culture of Silicon Valley and us on a larger scale.
The premise of the question that I think is raised by this, but also the Fire Festival, both of those documentaries, which we will talk about, but is what is our generation's version of what's acceptable when it comes to lying? And I think that there is an open question as to, our younger people, our millennials, are people who are in this newer Silicon Valley culture, not necessarily the older one, but are they more accepting of fake it till you make it as being okay, and the MO that is openly discussed in this documentary? It's openly discussed in the Fire Festival documentaries, and I think that it is not the whole story. And I think that what we really see here, which I like, and I can't tell if Alex Gibney, like, why it was done, because there was not, unlike some of the other ones, I agree, this is a little bit like Enron. That documentary has almost so much time to gestate that you really get a fully baked, refined story that's not just telling the story, but telling it in such a way where it's extremely compelling, and the tagline, "the smartest guys in the room," is so, just lets you chew on it for forever. This thing of this, oh, what is it for the guys who think they're the smartest in the room? And what could they do? Could anyone stop them? And this documentary, it may not have that thesis at the same level to be one of the greatest documentaries ever made. I mean, the standard of us comparing him to his other works is like, they're all the greatest, right?
Standard.
I mean, it's like, totally. It's an impossible standard to be at, because he's already produced in the documentary world things that are like the great, American documentary in a way.
Yes.
So he's already at that level.
I came in with expectations.
Yeah, and
and her story is fascinating.
Yeah, so he has done the best Scientology documentary, and there have been so many made.
No
and
doubt,
he has potentially the best corporate fraud documentary, and there are many made. So he's already at that level.
Yeah,
he's we'll eat up the content at either level. But
totally.
So the thesis that really draws me into this is the fake it till you make it, and the young people and their, what will they do with lying until something's true? I think that there are that is attacked not directly, but by this story. And what it is really, who was defrauded? Who believed the fraud? And one after the next is old men. Old men, don't know much, who see Elizabeth and they buy into this young, to them fairly attractive, young woman who has this cult of personality. And he does a lot of just shifting of face shots of her in the thing, where it's her with the hair and the eyes and the deep voice, and it's this very cult of personality showcase in the way that the documentary plays itself off. Her with the little thing and all these glamour shots continually shown at you, and almost like trying to make it hypnotic in a way that you're seeing perhaps what these old men, many men in their like 70s and some of them slightly younger, but many old men were the people who wrote the stories about her that were so glamorous, who went on her board, who helped her get more investors, who were the investors, people who were subject to the hypnosis that she was selling. And I think that is really interesting, because I think that cuts directly against this whole, like, is it the millennial generation that's so into the fraud, into the fake thing making? Because I think this really shows, like, and then his cuts obviously with Edison himself, saying that Edison basically was raising money and saying he had the light bulb figured out before he actually did. and that, he was the Wizard of Menlo Park. It's like he is the original American inventor, the inspiration for so many people. It's so fitting that she takes all her inspiration, and this documentary is just layered with Edison-ness and this idea that corporate fraud, sometimes working out well, but often not, being almost like an old tradition, is an interesting theme that comes through. It's not directly hit on, but I think that I'm not sure that her way of being exposes as much anything about young people and what young people are willing to do in their businesses to make it, like faking it, but as much as who is willing to believe fake narratives. And I honestly do not think you should really blame people who are defrauded, because people should expect the truth, but they helped her. They helped her with her fraud, and they didn't They didn't catch her. It starts to let you unpack what people want to believe. What do they want to believe? They found the next Edison. They found the next Steve Jobs. What do people want to believe? It's the greatest female entrepreneur ever. What is it that people wanted to believe about this story that made them not see the truth? And then there is the angle of it's so many old men who fell for her. Mm-hmm. It's so many old men. And I think that...
And who didn't believe no one who was a medical professional, and the main detractor who's in the story is an older female who runs or is a professor of medicine at Stanford. Completely denied her right off the bat.
Yes.
It's just an interesting, to your observation, it was the people who were never won over. First off, a female, and then also an expert in medicine.
Yes.
Those were the people who were just never convinced, always skeptical, and not surprisingly kept at arm's length, not allowed to be involved in any intimate way with anything going on.
And who ultimately stops her under pressure. It's not... there was incredible pressure that the lawyers put on. I have no idea what they thought they knew about the company to put the types of pressure they put on these people. But, it's basically two very young, a man and a woman who become the sources for the Wall Street Journal stories that, unravel the whole thing. I think the young people and everyone who's not the older men in this show come off looking pretty good, and it's a weird maybe that wasn't the intent, but it's just when you see who was kind of helping it along in weird ways and who wasn't, that's the picture that kind of gets painted. It's who did the spell work on. And I think that there was a bit of a spell being cast, and I think there's a pretty big difference between who would fall under the spell and who wouldn't. And you just see it. That's, I think, one of the most compelling things about seeing this in person. Seeing the visual version of this as opposed to just reading the book or listening to the podcast, which I listened to. So anyway, that was a very interesting part about watching this. Just another old guy who fell for it. Just another old guy who fell for it. You keep getting introduced to another old guy who fell for it. And it's very interesting. And then it's just
starboard.
Yes, yeah. What?
Yeah, the starboard was just filled with 70-year-old old men who were experienced, had a lot of credibility to lend to her, but didn't really know enough to vet what was going on at the company in any significant way.
Yeah, it almost
the perfect
It
targets.
almost becomes a joke, At some point in time, there's a scene where she's going to get some approval by lobbying personally some board of representatives in Arizona, and they just get this quote from this guy who's behind the thing, who's like, "There's not a thing that we could ask you that you wouldn't have answered 1,000,000 times over, so great." And you're like, dude, you don't know shit. Why are you saying such nice, incredibly nice things about her, and you don't know anything about her? What is happening? It's awkward. It's a little awkward.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, something I couldn't wrap my head around, and I'm sure there is some explanation for how they were hoodwinked. But her technology, which I wasn't sure if they were trying to say it was so brilliant, this concept of a small vial, just a couple drops of blood, and we can run hundreds of tests, which to me it's hard to understand why that's brilliant. Because to me, it's almost like saying, what if we made one 2x2 solar panel that goes on the roof of your house, it goes to your outlet, and it charges everything you want, including your car, like the Tesla, thing. And it works. And you're like, that's amazing. That sounds great. But my first question is, show me how that shit works. Because obviously, you know what I mean? It's like,
I think that's a great example.
I am going to sell you only 5 powders that can be combined in 1,000 ways and will hit every nutritional need for, whatever it is. It's just like perpetual energy. Do something with less. I'm going to figure out a way to give you half the gas and you're going to go twice the miles. It's like, that's amazing. An iPhone that you don't have to charge for an entire week. There's all these sorts of hard problems that if you could create a solution to, by cutting margins of, whether it's the volume of blood you need, the amount of energy you need to accomplish the same task, it's like, those are amazing inventions, but it would seem like it's not even an idea unless you have some sort of some actual punch to what you're, something real to what you're saying. So to me, and I'm sure there was some reason how they were convinced, but it was not clear at all, why was she able to get an idea like this that to me almost has no validity in concept alone.
Yeah.
The concept, it's the same thing to me as a 2x2 solar panel that does everything. It can power your entire office building. It's great, show me how, or at least put some standard of proof. And it wasn't even clear if she got close. I mean, from one of the medical professionals, she said, this is medically impossible. I mean, in theory, what she's even saying is not correct. It comes from a misunderstanding of it. And that was what was not quite clear in the documentary. And it goes back to what you're saying. It's was this just a board of older white men who a spell was cast over? Because it's hard to understand why she was able to get past that for years. I mean, the company ran for 6 years
kept
before?
Raising more and more money. I mean, people are always following each other, and they're looking to this big family invested, so this big, and this Secretary of State isn't on the board, so how could they be a part of a fraud? It must work, and I don't know shit about this. I just want a piece of something big. But I think it gets to a bigger problem, which I actually know that most people fall for a lot of the time, which is basically that if someone is talking and they don't understand, but the person sounds like it's very complex and there's the indications of other people believe them, they believe that person says things that are making sense. They have a reliable problem in their reasoning, which is that, okay, what you're saying right now is confusing me, but I don't know everything. So when you're saying stuff that sounds smart, it's such an annoying sentence to me because I just would never, doesn't come through.
You mean in this tenor of voice?
No, but it's just, you're saying something that sounds smart. I don't get it because I'm so dumb. And therefore, you're probably saying something that's right. And I feel like a lot of people fall for this all the time. They're like, oh my God, you're telling me how... So I had Tim Draper with the Bitcoin, tie.
Just that guy?
Yeah, it's you're telling me about how Bitcoin is going to solve every fucking problem that's ever been created on planet Earth. And I don't get even I hardly get even what blockchain is, but this is the wave of the future. All I know is that I didn't understand the internet either, and now it's everywhere. And, I think a lot of people think like that, which just makes them, they're so vulnerable. They're just so vulnerable because they don't trust themselves enough to have good instinct, which is really sad, because it'll just a lot of people. It's yeah, you might not know, if you can do it, but some journalist figured it. He's people can just, like gravity doesn't not exist once you stop understanding like the nuances of the science. Like you do know the world. If someone is telling you something and it doesn't quite make sense to you, there is no benefit to be had by going, well, they're probably like just way smarter than me and like it makes total sense and I'm just too dumb to understand it. It's like that's not a helpful thought for anyone to ever have. But I feel like a lot of people, that is actually their default when they don't understand.
I mean, basically this, like they seem like they know what they're talking about. It throughout what it did well too is, and makes you question, is they start with Edison, which is Edison is kind of revered as the best inventor ever, and that's how he was taught to me younger. And now people kind of tell this alternate narrative a little bit, which was he was a brilliant businessman and sometimes really brilliant at taking credit for things a little beyond what just his sheer genius created. And it kind of leans into the same thing with Steve Jobs and makes me wonder how accurately we as a society extract lessons from people. Like, for example, Steve Jobs, it's like, you know, he seemed like a tyrannical asshole, so maybe that's what it takes to get products built. Or he had the reality distortion field, which is great for the book. I mean, fascinating. Love hearing that. But then we feel that this is some core thing to how a major inventor works, and we forget how like he came out with like the iPhone and it was successful, and multiple renditions, and the iPad and some of the Mac computers that came out and worked, and you saw users saw them, and they like that is what established Apple is like. Sure, the reality distortion field, but like clearly like we don't hear, because maybe it's not interesting, the different, you know, things he did with the engineers to actually achieve these goals.
Yeah.
And
the computer was not fake.
Like it's as if maybe because it's the most interesting part of his story, the anecdote, for example, the reality distortion field, you know, thinking something and making it into being, or we hear these stories like from the Jobs movie where he's like, make it fucking work. Like he just yells at an engineer until they make it work.
Or the thing that's a direct parallel to this, which is like it needs to be this size. Like it needs to fit into this container, which is like things that has historically constrained Apple. They're always telling people it needs to be in this size or in this body shape. We need to have it so there's no seam here. Like it could be one body. It's like okay, we got to reinvent the whole hinge to be able to do this, you know. And it's like, okay, so they do that, but at the end of the day. And so in the movie, they're saying that about the Edison box. So like, we need to run 200 tests inside this box, which creates like all this hardware, running this little arm and like, you know, like put it like diluting things inside of a little box. And they're like, you know, and people march in the room with the same orders, clearly coming straight from the Steve Jobs playbook, being like, the Edison box needs to be this big and by this big. It's like, it's supposed to like this big so it can run all the tests maybe. You know, it's like, just all this stuff where you're like, okay, the difference is that, like, you can march into a room and demand things, and, like, I guess that's what Steve Jobs did, but at the end of the day, like, if it didn't work, it wasn't in your hand, or else there would be no Apple, because their reputation would be zero. Like, that's the difference. Like, fraud versus not fraud. Yes. Like, it's not really that crazy, and I think that it's the trouble. I feel like people let people get away with, like, how did they become such frauds? Like, you know, when you talk about something like a Ponzi scheme, often it seems like someone can't deal with failure. They tell their investors, I'm going to make you 10%, I'm going to make you 20%, and then they don't. And then they go, oh, fuck, I can fuck with the books, and then, like, I don't have to face the music. Like, kids do this with their parents. They're like, they lie about things, like, a little bit. So they're like, I don't want to get the lecture. It's like, or you could just get it, you know, like, and then you wouldn't have to be lying to your parents and ruin that relationship. But I mean, that's the thing that goes on. I think that people get into big problems, and I think they think there's a slippery slope. I don't necessarily think when fake it till you make it goes wrong is always that problem. I think that there are people who their brain just works a little different. They're morally and integrity wise at not a high level, and whether or not a good percentage of the population is willing to lie and cheat and do criminal things, which it might be because there are a lot of people who are, but or whether it's a small percentage of the population, whatever. But I think there are people who, yes, they do look around Silicon Valley and they go, yeah, there are a lot of people here who did kind of fake it till they make it. They were selling investors on this vision. They didn't know if they could actually do the vision. They shot for the moon, and they, sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes that's just how you make progress. You get the money to then make the progress. There's a little bit of that, but I think that there's a certain subset of people who believe they just get that wrong. They take license, It's people who look to other people and they go, why are you punishing me? Like, he did that too. And it's like, that's not morality. Like, you fucked it up. Like, you can't look to other people and go, he was lying, why is my lie any worse? Because then that means you don't understand morality. You've stopped worrying about whether or not lying is good or bad or for what purpose, and you've just decided that what you think other people are doing maybe at their worst is okay for you to do. So it allows you to be super brutal to your competitors, to be super brutal in your life because you believe that other people maybe had to do that to be at your level, or you're competing on some level, and that's really the secret for how people are successful. Is they're pieces of shit. And they fuck and they cheat and they filled up, or what is it? There's like some story with Phil Knight like stealing papers like in his book, I think, and it's like they're like, oh, all the best ones, they're just cheaters at some point, even if it's just a little bit. And it's like,
as opposed to the lower level people who never cheat.
Yeah, as opposed to the dumb people who cheat and they just like do shitty crime, or there are people who are like they don't have the guts to cheat and steal and lie and do what it takes when the cards are down. If you were in a fucking war scenario and it was the time, would you get the job done no matter what it takes and not speak about it until afterwards? Like, there's a lot of people who do and have done and do that shit when the chips are down, and I think that's the difference between morality and integrity and not. And I think there is a reliable amount of people who don't really have it, and I think that's the explanation that makes more sense to me. Not that it's in anyone who falls on the path, but it's more that there's a certain group of people who don't really get morality, and they make bad decisions when they think they've figured out the secret, which is that people cheat a little bit. They fucking do war crimes when no one's looking, and all the rest. And I think that's just how a group of people thinks. It's how they think the world works. Maybe that is how a good group of people actually do become successful. We have scandals all the time, corruption, Panama Papers, but none of those people are making the world a better place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to confront that reality all the time, is that, you have to decide, even if you did find that to be true, that a large number of successful people are doing kind of morally ambiguous things, and therefore that's the way the world works. It's like, that's actually not morality. Morality is still deciding to do what you think is right, regardless of whether you think it would get you ahead. And in fact, taking that hit in terms of your potential success to do it right.
Yes. Whether or not you have the power or the opportunity to get away with it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's weird. I feel that in the entertainment business, in so many industries. I mean, obviously in Silicon Valley, it's like you just have to decide independently of how you think it'll affect your success. If you want to be, ethical and above board or not. You just have to decide that beforehand, because, if whether it will help you be successful or not is a factor in your moral decision making, I think you've kind of already gotten off track.
I agree.
Yeah.
Or whether or not you say, I've been here for a while and this is how people do it. If that is how you start thinking, then you've lost yourself too.
Yeah.
Because I don't care. I do think that, there's no excuse for being a piece of shit, for committing crimes, for doing fraud. And if you really wanted to do good in the world, like she says she does, I guess I'm just not really into the whole ends justify the means type of thing. especially when you're not 100% sure of the ends.
I mean, the whole moral appeal of Elizabeth Holmes, I thought, was pretty irritating. I mean, it's indicative of, I don't know if you get this sense, but that we, at least the kind of in the zeitgeist right now, is almost as if we have decided to value signaling that you're a good person over being a good person. Like, you know, I'm not to generalize, but sometimes in the way that the headlines work and the outrage of, you know, the press works and people on social media works, is that it's almost as if the worst thing you could do is say something really offensive or pessimistic or not virtuous, and the best thing you can do is just say you're for those things, which is what I found so annoying about Elizabeth Holmes and everyone working, like doing their startup and saying just this kind of moral badge they were wearing about how good it was to, you know, imagine a world where you could have these tests that just help people never, you know, die before their time and never have to say, you know, I wish I had caught it sooner, which was just so annoying to me because it's they didn't deliver. And it's like, of course, everyone, like, you think you're the only person who morally would like to save lives?
Yeah, exactly. Or stop premature death? It's especially annoying because it's like, yes, I want that, but please stop. Please stop lying to me. Like, I of course want that. That is like one of the greatest human tragedies. You are specifically targeting the weakness that we all have, you know, which is a confronting death of close relatives, you know. It's specifically targeting this weakness. It's so disgusting.
Maybe this is too much of a tangent, but it really reminds me of the discussion that we have of, you know, climate change, for example. Like, just rewarding a politician for aggressively being about the green movement and saving. And, like, of course, if it's a politician who's denying climate change versus not, great. I'm going to cheer on the one who acknowledges climate change is a problem. But I feel like we're stuck in a time where we just really love people who say the right things. Like a Bernie, for example.
Well,
Am I going off track too much?
No. So I think that this does get back to the question of who is we that you're talking about. So love who is we? Because are you talking about the old men who love Elizabeth Holmes, or are you talking about young millennials?
Like, I don't know if you saw that when they like go into Dianne Feinstein's, who's in this documentary, office, and are like, we demand you sign the Green New Deal now. And it's like, you think you're like the first group of people who's been like, let's do aggressive climate change, like, you know, let's put that into law now. Let's put in money. And Dianne Feinstein, like a seasoned Democrat who's actually made tons of progress in this arena, is like, yeah, that bill specifically is not going to get passed. Like, I already know how the Senate and House works. Like, that's not going to get passed, and it costs too much. It's just not practical. And it's just, to me, they want her to die on a useless resolution. Yes, like,
because
wouldn't it be great?
It's not even, doesn't even. Yeah, obviously that didn't even, wasn't. It was just a symbolic, essentially.
Symbolic, like, feeling so good about, no one's thought to charge into a senator's office before and demand change now. That's why change hasn't happened. People haven't demanded it. And they charge in, and it's if we create, to me, those people are just ready for being swindled by the next Elizabeth Holmes. Like, all I need for you is to tell me what I want to hear about climate change. I'm not going to care whether you're going to deliver it. I just want you to tell me that that's what you want. And to me, it's kind of like, I don't think it's special that you want to fix the environment. It's so obvious to me that my first and immediate follow-up question is like, do you have something practical to make any progress? Like, sure, I'm not.
Well, I think that gets back to the premise question that is not so addressed in the way you're answering it by this documentary, but the premise question of, do millennials love fraud? I mean, are they ready for it, like you're describing? Are they willing to take a story and sand that will fall through their fingers for the right lines, and who is really willing to take that. And I think that this movie destroys a little bit of the narrative that it is such a millennial thing, that this fake it till you make it mentality and also the susceptibility to it is so young when it really is very age old. But I do see what you're saying, this young people who are really ready to be swindled because they do really care so much about symbolic things. That is a very vulnerable state to be in, I guess, because someone can say the right things to you and get you. That's what you need.
But patting her on the back for, what a great mission she was doing to save all these lives. I don't know why we publicly want to praise someone for saying something good, which is the easiest thing to do. It's unfortunate that she was able to take basically our goodwill, which is wanting more female founders, for example. It's just like a totally virtuous thing to want. More representation, more equal, opportunity and more inspiration for a lot of people can see themselves changing the world. Like they take this kind of good instinct in us and just make a mockery of it. That's what I found so it hurt a little bit, just because of how it basically makes it look stupid. Mm-hmm. Like wanting to raise her up as this big female founder.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we're so willing to be had, and I'm so glad we can have feminism in 2019 so we can buy more Marvel movie tickets and get excited about Elizabeth Holmes. Which is obviously that's not the extent of it, but I just think it's kind of annoying that is so much of, at least how it's become something that can be commodified versus something real.
It is the enduring problem from this, is that she did cash in on a commodification of her uniqueness, and as a woman who was the head of a $9 billion potentially world-shifting event, and we love that story, and she abused that story. It says a little bit about everyone, but we hope that story can exist, and it is tough because you don't want to be suspicious of that story, but she is the most high profile. There is no, Elizabeth Holmes, but not a liar. There is no one of that level. And she was the soul, the biggest, and she was a fraud. And that's a real tough thing in the sciences too, especially. Sciences and tech, a big place for her to have become such a huge titan and then been a fraud. So.
Yeah. It's frustrating. I mean, you've mentioned this before about, Silicon Valley inventions. It's we come up with all this great innovation. What do we do it? You talked about it with TV and then phone technology. And what do we use it for? To sell more people shit. And it's kind of annoying how even something like the impulse for progress can just become something that it's used to sell more shit. I don't get why, as consumers, we should ever think it's really cute or cool for a major corporation, not like a Tom's. There are certain exceptions, socially conscious companies that their whole profit model is built around some sort of socially conscious, evident, kind of standard, whether it's food company or a Tom's type model. But credit card companies, beer companies, I don't know why we would ever bestow them with the moral authority to promote pro-social values. I mean, I remember I went to the Gay Pride Parade in West Hollywood last year, and I was just astonished with how many major banks, not one, multiple major banks that sponsor it. And it's just I don't, it's cool for something to be mainstream. I don't really think we should ever let a major corporation give them a bunch of kudos for moral authority, because it's not they're going to stick to that message when they don't think it's going to make them profit. If you think they're going to stick
maybe
with
it'll
that,
always make them profit.
Yeah, maybe. It's I don't think they were fucking doing it before they thought it would make them profit. So I don't think we should bestow them with that moral authority. I think it's stupid. Someone could be you're dumb, it's becoming mainstream. And
becoming
if it's
mainstream
good, you should
and
accept it.
it's becoming
It's
mainstream
good. It
and-
doesn't cause any problem. Why would you question it? I think
Okay.
it's the same thing with Elizabeth Holmes. It's like, why let some random company give them all these moral cookies and be so excited about it when it's just a company that like hasn't proven itself and is going to try to make a profit?
Hi, everyone. If you want to keep up with us, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube for the video episodes.